Jerusalem is the seat of Israel's government. Today, we follow through on this recognition and open our embassy in the historic and sacred land of Jerusalem.
President Trump, by recognizing history, you have made history. We are in Jerusalem, and we are here to stay.
Israel's a sovereign nation with the right to determine its own capital, the same right that is enjoyed by every other country in the world.
We also witnessed today a ceremony of the Prime Minister of Israel and the administration of President Trump burying the peace process, burying the two-state solution, killing the hope in the minds of the people of the Middle East as a whole with the possibility of peace.
Well, it was a campaign promise, and it has been delivered. The U.S. Embassy moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Other countries have followed suit or are in the process of doing that. The United States is the first one, but Guatemala this week, Paraguay, Honduras. Romania has a proposal to move its embassy, would be the first EU member to do so very soon. Democrats supporting this. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, saying in a long overdue move, we have moved our embassy to Jerusalem. Every nation should have the right to choose its capital. I sponsored legislation to do this 2 decades ago, and I applaud President Trump for doing so. Obviously, there were other people who had a real problem with it, including many Palestinians who took to the streets today. Some 40,000 Palestinians staged demonstrations along the border. More than 50 people were killed in the rioting there, 2,300 wounded. And some of the Arab Street weighing in on all of that today as well. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. And we welcome former National Security Council spokesman Michael Anton. Michael, let me start with you. This was the plan for a long time. Has it gone as planned, do you think?
It's more than a campaign promise. First of all, this is U.S. law for, I think, 23 years, passed in 1995. And this is one of the things I just want to point out that I think drives middle America and the average American crazy about Washington. That Congress passes a law with overwhelming bipartisan support, puts a waiver provision in it, so the will of the people through their elected representatives is that this should happen. And every 6 months, every president waves it, and it never happens. It's a kind of theater in a way. And then a president finally fulfills the terms of the law. And you saw this, yes, he's got some support, but a lot of his domestic political critics, level all kinds of accusations at him when I thought, as to terms of the law, this was a bipartisan consensus for 2 decades.
So on the bigger picture, Mara, on the Middle East peace process and where this goes, what does this do to that?
Well, I think that's the big question. Kind of now what? It's not unlike getting out of the Iran deal. Okay, now what are you going to do next? The Middle East peace proposal from the Trump administration has yet to be unveiled. As you heard the Palestinian leader, they're not inclined to enter talks now. They feel the United States is no longer an honest broker. It's just totally on Israel's side. So I think now the ball is in the president's court, and he has to come up with the next steps for Middle East peace if that's what he wants. If he just wanted to fulfill a campaign promise, he has certainly done that.
Molly.
I think it is awful to see what we saw, the loss of life with so many Palestinians being killed. And the Washington Post had reported that they were told, that Hamas had told them that Israel was not manning these sites on the border, and it was causing people to rush, and then they found out that they were manned. That is a very sad thing, and it's not fun to watch. It is also true, though, that I think that this could, in the long term, lead to a greater chance for peace. We have the reality that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and it is important that everyone acknowledge that, and it's time for Palestinians to acknowledge that, and that dealing with reality is a good way to move forward toward a peace agreement, which people hope for.
Steve?
Well, there are other things taking place sort of behind the scenes or on a subterranean level that suggest that there is some move toward peace. I mean, when you talk about the talks that are happening out of public eye between Israel and the Saudis, or the support, the common values on the Iran deal between Israel and the Saudis, Israel and UAE, the Bahrainis stepping up and speaking out in favor of the withdrawal from the Iran deal. I think you're seeing these movements. This gets a lot of the headlines, particularly because of the loss of life. But there are other indications that are much more positive. And this is something that Donald Trump campaigned on. This is something that he said. And I think Mike's exactly right. This is something that you had presidents of both parties saying for literally decades, and they didn't do it. He did it.
The equation of pulling out of the Iran deal then moving the embassy, and those two things together, how do they interchange? How do they interlock? How do they affect each other?
Well, I think that, first of all, I just want to follow up on a point that Steve made there. I think when you said missed an opportunity, I don't think this is it's really the Palestinians that are missing the opportunity. It's really the Palestinians that need to come back to the table. That's what's important here. If the Palestinians, if Mahmoud Abbas would just come back and talk to this administration, talk to this president, and sit down, I think he would find an incredible willingness and eagerness to get a deal done. I've heard President Trump talk about this so many times. You know, there's an old saying that goes around Washington that people who have dealt with this issue, that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and that's what they're doing now. I think it's also interesting that what you're seeing is a lot of this is coming out of Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas and run by Hamas, right? And you're not seeing this kind of, at least this intensity coming out of the West Bank, right? This is clearly being ginned up for political purposes. And the White House is so concerned. Look, it was only a couple of weeks ago that the White House hosted a conference on the future of Gaza and how to improve its infrastructure, improve the lives of its people. Got the Gulf Arab states to show up and you know, pledge some aid. And these are states that don't like to talk to one another in some respect because of the dispute in the Gulf, and don't like to be in the same room with Israeli representatives. And they were all there. I think that was another positive and hopeful sign. If only the Palestinians would embrace the possibilities that I think President Trump is opening up for them.
I guess the question is, does the Arab Street change now because of the different relationship with the Trump administration and the Gulf states as far as how they react to both things, the Iran deal and this move?
It does seem a reshaping in the Middle East from what we had seen in the previous administration, with an effort to make Iran more dominant, but I think it remains to be seen how they respond.
Maura?
Yeah, I mean, I come back to this question. If the United States is going to be the leader and is going to put forward a peace plan, it needs to do that. The Palestinians will come to the table if they see a good plan where there's something in it for them. Right now, they don't know what it is.
But for years, the Middle East peace has been used as something to block progress in other areas in the region. If you ever, you know, the foreign policy establishment says you have to solve Middle East peace first, and then you can address threats from Iraq, you can address jihadism, you can address Iran, you can address all these other things. Well, I think this sends a message pretty clearly that's not going to be an obstacle anymore. Take that, set it to the side, and deal with threats like Iran on a realistic basis.
So it changes the paradigm. It changes the starting point.
Well, I mean, Britt said it well earlier in the show. You're dealing with reality here. This is a more realistic look at the way that the Middle East is unfolding.
Final word.
One thing, too, is keep in mind that Iran is a big supporter of Hamas. A lot of the wealth that Iran was able to take in because of the Iran deal, unfrozen assets, and then the wealth that they were able to generate by being allowed to do business with countries that used to sanction them, they are spending that to destabilize the Middle East, to fund terror. They're funneling it to Hamas and to other groups like this. And hopefully, with the U.S. out of the Iran deal, perhaps some new sanctions and some other secondary sanctions going back into effect, some of that resource funnel gets choked off, gets reduced, and Iran doesn't have the resources, or it has fewer resources, to spread mayhem, chaos, and violence the way it's been doing.
We will see.